and the husband is often called the pakkan yangban, the outside man, and a wife will refer to her husband as uri pakkan yangban, our outside man, and the inside person, the ansaram, is
Wife.
the wife. And so another word for the ansaram is anne. The anne is the wife. Uri anne, and it's funny in Korea you say uri anne, uri nampian, uri pakkan yangban, which is silly, it's not all of us, it's not our husband, unless you're polygamist, then it's our husband. But that's what it sounds like. Okay, so separation of duties between husband and wife. Okay, between junior and senior there is
Respect.
Well, there is. You can call it Sejong's tomb, but it's really Yeongnam. Okay, and every king had his own tomb with its own name. Most of the kings were very close to Seoul. Remember when we were in the Cheongmyo? She said that the tombs, the bodies were not buried there at the Cheongmyo. That's just the memorial. But the tombs were buried. She said there's the 5 tombs on the west and the 9 tombs on the east. Those are clusters of tombs. There are a couple of tombs in Gangnam, she said. I don't know where all the tombs are. I've been to some of them, but this is the most important. And as the map shows, there's also a tomb of King Hyeojong, who was a king about 150 years after King Sejong. This particular tomb is the farthest one away from Seoul, but all of the tombs are part of the UNESCO World Treasure thing. And we talked about the various UNESCO World Treasures. Well, now all of the Joseon Dynasty tombs have been named part of the UNESCO treasure. Okay. Yeah.
Why here?
Here because of good geomancy.
Wood, steel, water.
Yeah, the 5 elements, and geomancy in Korean is pronounced pungsu. And how do you say it in Chinese?
Feng Shui.
Feng shui. People know about feng shui, but they don't know about pungsu. Yes.
In the War Museum, when you walk in through the white pillars into that room with the ray of light, is that something to do with you?
Probably so. That War Museum faces south, and anything that faces south is probably coordinated with pungsu. This tomb faces south. And when you get up into the hill there, you'll see there are hills around it, and it's sort of protected by the hills. That's the essence of Pungsu. Pungsu is wind and water. So you want a place that's harmonious with the winds and the water. Okay? So that's part of why it's located here. And we need to talk about King Sejong himself. And let's read the sign here. So here's the tomb of King Sejong. The 4th monarch of the Joseon Dynasty. This is important. I'm a little closer so I don't have to yell so loud with all the noise out here. The fact that he's the 4th monarch is important. The first monarch was who? King Isangye, and he's known as Daejeon. And Isangye, by the time he became king, he was already ready to give up the throne. And not his first son, they made a law, they adopted a constitution that said the first son shall become the king. They didn't observe it right from the beginning. Later on they did. But it turns out that among Isangye's sons, he had 6 sons. Excuse me, he had 6 sons by his first wife and 2 sons by his second wife. And he decided to name his baby son as his successor. Now here's a little scene now. And it made the older son upset. And so number 5 son kills the boys. And he puts another son on the throne for 2 years to take any slings and arrows and other special slings and arrows. A metaphor meaning possibility of being attacked. He put another king on the throne, another brother on the throne in case there was assassination attempt. And then when things were safe, he stepped up and became the king himself. Now he learned that from his own father. His father, when he took over the kingdom, did not become king right off the bat. He stayed behind the scenes for 4 years. The dynasty was founded in 1392. That's one of the things he founded in 1392. That's founded the Joseon Dynasty. It's an easy date to remember because exactly 100 years before.
1492.
흰자의 길이었어요. 그러니까 그 맨 가운데 길은
And
다시
so it's an easy date to remember.
원래는 그렇게 하면 이 홍산문을 지나면 맨 가운데 맨
You can also remember going 100 facial
One direction. Sword.
always.
Standing on
But
demons.
these guys symbolically are guarding this temple. And in Buddhist scripture, the heaven in Buddhism is a mountain. And you go to higher and higher levels as you get to higher and higher heavens. And they have these four guardians of the north, south, east, and west of the central Buddhist mountain, which is heaven. And they keep those who are unworthy of God.
Dragon. Standing on demons. Kuliosos. Guardians of the temple. Okay, this is where the giant 13-story pagoda used to be.
Dragon appeared.
Temple
That's
center.
not what we're going to do with the Buddhist perspective of what we're going to do. We're going to go stand on this side here. What's here? What does it look like what's
Main hall.
here? It says there was a Buddhist triad here. And you see these three stones right here in the middle? Does that spell Buddhist triad to you?
Yes.
In the main hall here. And then this, notice how tight the foundation stones are together here. Because the foundation stones are so tight, what does that tell you? Up. They go higher and higher, the closer we are together here, the better foundation you have for going up. So that's what we're going to see here. But before the Shilla dynasty finished, the last 150 years were marked by assassinations.
Woo!
A king did not come to the throne except from the assassination of the previous king. So it turned into a bloody, chaotic period toward the end of the Shilla period. And one of the interesting things that happened during one of these fights for the throne, where different princes were arguing that they should be the next king, one of these princes turned to a rich man who had developed a maritime kingdom of trade between Korea and China. And he developed a maritime kingdom where he was really the king of the trade and really the king politically of what was going on. Now, we know a lot about this guy. His name was Chang Po-go. We know a lot about him because there was a famous Japanese journal that was written at about the same time. This journal was the Journal of Enin, E-N-N-I-N, Enin. Enin, the Journal of Enin, was translated to English and a book published about him by a guy by the name of Reischauer, Edwin O. Reischauer. What name does that mean to you?
McCune Reischauer.
The Reischauer, McCune Reischauer, exactly. And what else do you know about Edwin O. Reischauer? He was the first scholar of Japanese history in the United States. He was a student at Harvard, professor at Harvard. He was the child of missionaries. He married a Japanese wife. And he was a professor of Japanese studies, the first professor of Japanese studies at Harvard, and became really the godfather of Japanese studies all around America. He died maybe 20 years ago. But in his senior years, he did a very interesting thing. He was Jack Kennedy's professor at Harvard. And Jack Kennedy studied Japanese history from Edwin Reischauer. So when Jack Kennedy became elected President of the United States, who did he appoint as ambassador to Japan? Reischauer. Actually, Reischauer. And in so doing, he broke a ban, a restriction against doing a certain something in the Foreign Service. What would that something be?
Related family was part of history.
Sending an ambassador who was married to a woman from that culture to that culture. And so this was the first time that happened, and since that time, several ambassadors have been married to women from that area. But the first was Edwin Reischauer. Well, I mentioned that about him just because he's an interesting guy, but I also mentioned that because he wrote his dissertation when he started out as a scholar on Enin. Enin was this monk who went from Japan to China, like who? Like Huisang and Hecho and these other Korean monks who were going to China. The Japanese were on The Japanese, what's that? The Japanese were on the same sheet of music. The idea is you have to go to the source to learn about it. So you go to India, you go to China, and you see it for real for yourself.
He went to China from Japan.
So he went to China from Japan. And on his way, by sea, sailing past the coast of Korea, he ran into trouble. His boats, he had like 5 boats, and 2 or 3 of them started taking on water. And he pulled into a Korean port and got his ships repaired and was convinced the Koreans had better ships. And then when he got up to China, he sold his Japanese ships with the Korean repairs, went about his business in China for like 9 years. And then when he came back, he had to buy ships to get back home. And he insisted in China on buying
Korean ships.
So it's an interesting window on technology in the early days. He also says another interesting thing. Now, we're talking about Changpo-go, okay? This thing on Enon is a footnote about Changpo-go, okay? He writes, Enon gives details about the communities along the China coast that were totally Korean communities. For example, the communities were totally Korean. They were speaking Korean. They even had their own Buddhist temples for Koreans scattered along the coast of China. It was that kind of detail that Enon gives us that helps us understand more about the Changpo-go situation. Changpo-go was a very successful tradesman who turned into kind of a political leader, and he actually controlled the waterways between Korea and China. And he controlled these communities out there. And he actually controlled what we will call, for the second time in Korea, a Thessalocracy. What's our Thessalocracy?
A sea-oriented place.
A sea-oriented kingdom, yeah. He virtually had a kingdom of the sea, okay? Well,